Good afternoon, everyone. Nice to see you again. In this episode, I was going to talk about access to airplanes and the different ways that a general aviation pilot can get into an aircraft and utilize it for their flying. So the most common way for pilots, whether you're a private pilot or commercial pilot, to access an airplane is basically by renting one, right? So there are operators at most airports that will not only teach and provide instruction, but will also have aircraft to rent. The typical situation for that is you basically get checked out with that renter. You may have to hold some liability insurance. I think a lot of places nowadays are wanting you to have about $10,000 in renter's insurance to cover any accidents. Then obviously their insurance will cover the remainder. And then you'll probably need to get checked out in each aircraft. And depending on the complexity of the aircraft will determine how involved the checkout is. In places that have multiple types of airframes or multiple aircraft, I've seen one or two things happen, or a couple things happen. For example, I used to rent from a place out of Northeast Philadelphia called Hearty Aviation. They had a wide variety of aircrafts, so they had kind of the whole line of the Piper Cherokee line, so everything from an Arrow to an Archer to a Warrior. And all those are roughly the same airplane. The differences are obviously the Arrow is a complex aircraft with a retractable gear. The Archer had a 180 horsepower engine, and then the Warrior had a 160 horsepower engine. So in cases like that where you have kind of a family of airplanes, typically if you check out in the highest grade of that aircraft, you would be checked out on all the others. So for example, using that same example, so if I got checked out in the Arrow, then I could also fly the Archer and Warrior. The flip side, however, a lot of times if I got checked out in the Warrior, I would not be eligible to fly the Archer or the Arrow. And then someplace like Hearty, they also had not only the Piper line of aircraft, they had Cessna 172s, and then they also had American Grumman Tiger aircraft. So there was a wide variety there, and I think in all those you had to at least check out in the type airplane for each of those categories. The other thing with rentals is a lot of times they're looking to make money, so typically you're required to fly a certain number of hours for every day the airplane is gone. So if you're going to take the airplane out for the whole day, there's probably a 3 or 4 hour requirement per day. And when it comes to rental, the other challenge is sometimes it's difficult to get an airplane for multiple days if you're trying to do a trip somewhere. So a lot of times it's just day flights, maybe 1 or 2 days. So it could be a little bit cost prohibitive. And then I'm going to talk about costs here in a little bit. I think the next opportunity outside of renting an airplane is joining a flying club. And I'm going to talk about what my experience has been in looking at flying clubs. I know there are some areas where it might be a rental situation, but they call it a flying club. But a true flying club, you have a fixed number of participants. So in our case, it's 15 members per airplane, and then a fixed number of airplanes. So I'll talk about the club. When I first joined it, we had 2 aircraft, the ability to hold 30 members. And from the aircraft standpoint, we had a Piper Archer, so a PA-28181, and then we also had a Piper Lance, which was the earlier version of the Saratoga, and that was, this one had a T-tail, so it was a PA-32 RT-300. So the Archer, if you're not familiar, is a 4-seat, single-engine, fixed-pitch, fixed-gear propeller airplane that Piper makes. And then the Lance is a 6-seat. The back 4 seats are in a club configuration, so they're facing each other. And that is a high performance, so it's greater than 300 horsepower, and it's also a complex retractable airplane. So there was an equity buy-in. I think back then, and so this is 2005, I think the equity buy-in was like either $2,500 or $3,000. And essentially what that $3,000 did was give you a share of the club. So in theory, if the club was to dissolve, you would get 1/30 of all the profits that were there because there was 30 members. So that was the initial price of joining the club, and then that money, that equity investment, was also returnable to you if you were to leave the club. And the other thing with a club that's different than renting is there was a fixed price that everybody paid. that fixed price basically took care of all the fixed items that were associated with the club. So that meant paying for the insurance to cover both the airplanes. It also meant paying for the hangars that the airplanes are housed in. And then I think it also included the subscriptions to all the navigation for the GPSs in the airplanes. And so that dollar amount was basically calculated by the treasurer and then divided by 30. So that was a fixed price you'd pay whether you flew 0 hours or 100 hours. And then the aircraft utilization itself was calculated similar to like a rental rate, and that was paid, or that was based on how much you actually flew the airplane. And I'll talk in a minute about how that's calculated because it is a little bit different than when you rent an airplane. Yep, so from a club perspective, there's three costs, right? There's the buy-in price to join the club. There is a monthly fee that you pay to kind of keep the fixed items operating, and then there's the hourly rate that you pay for flying the aircraft. So the advantages of the club, in my opinion, is a couple-fold. Number one, it gets you exposure to typically nicer airplanes. So in our case, both our Lance and our Archer were well equipped. They had, the 430, the Garmin 430 WAS GPSs, so they had the ability to do WAS approaches. Both had autopilots, and then we added more things to them later on. The other advantage is the airplanes are just also well cared for, because I think when you have a limited number of people using the airplanes and you have that equity stake in there, most of the members treat the airplanes not like a renter, but like as a partial owner. So that was a benefit too. The other difference, or the other cost savings that comes into play, is how that utilization or that hourly rate is calculated. Typically, when you rent an airplane, the fixed-base operator or the school or whoever's renting the airplane has calculated an hourly rate and will charge you for that. And that includes, obviously, fuel utilization, maintenance, preventative maintenance or planned maintenance. So all those factors are put in there. And then, obviously, if the plane is being leased back, meaning there's someone else that owns the airplane and leasing it to the school as part of a business, there's probably a cut for the owner as well for every hour that is flown. And that time is calculated in most rental airplanes by the Hobbs meter. So the Hobbs meter is basically just an electronic clock in the airplane that measures time in tenths of an hour. And that typically starts running the minute you put the power on the airplane to the minute you turn the power off. So if you spend 20 minutes on the ground taxiing, you're paying for 20 minutes of flight time, even though you're burning less fuel and not flying. In the club, we use the tachometer time, or the tach time, which is tied to the engine. And while it does measure hours in tenths, or actually in hundredths of an hour, it typically only measures a true hour when you're at cruise RPM or higher. And then there's some factor of less time being recorded when you're at lower RPMs. So in the case of a club airplane, if I'm sitting there taxiing or waiting for 20 minutes to take off, I'm not going to be paying 20 minutes worth of time or recording 20 minutes worth of time. I'm probably only going to record like 10 minutes of time because it's recording at a much slower rate. So there's definitely an advantage there for you, because typically you're going to get a little bit over an hour, typically 1.1, 1.2 hours per hour flown. So you're actually getting a little bit more time for your money when it comes to the club plane. And then the second part of that is, the example I gave is when I did my instrument training, a lot of that time was spent in approach cruise settings, so lower RPM, so I think typically 2,000 to 2,200 RPM. And it would be not unusual to see 1.3 and even some cases 1.4 hours of flight time for 1 hour attack time. So there's a nice cost advantage there. But the other side of the cost advantage is also just on the straight rate. When I joined the club back in 2005, a typical 4-seat single-engine prop airplane was typically costing $100 to $125 an hour. And then in the club, I feel like we were charging $80 an hour for it at that point in time. And again, that $80 is probably going to get you more than 1 hour of flight time. So using today's hours to compare the cost of using the club versus renting an airplane, I'll use our Archer because that's a more common airframe that's common to both the club and rental. Our Archer averages right now about $100 per hour tack time if we're utilizing it, and that's as of last month. When I looked online to fly an Archer anywhere in this area, which is the Philadelphia area, I think I saw prices upwards of anywhere from $180 to $225 an hour, and in some cases the extreme was like $250 to $275. Now in those later aircraft, they were newer Archers that had full glass panels, so I think they're obviously charging a little bit of a premium for that. But even in the best case scenario, you're talking about a $60 to $70 difference per hour of measure, but again, remember, we're using tack time, so even greater than that. What it boils down to is I think if, you're going to be flying a lot, my best advice to you is if you cannot get into an aircraft ownership or partnership, which I'm going to talk about next, finding a good club is a good way to get best cost for your dollar. Now, that being said, at a certain point, I think all of us want to buy and own an airplane, and so there's two factors that come into there, right? Is what is your budget, number one, and number two, what is your mission? I think many of us, when we think about buying an airplane, we're probably thinking about what is the top dog out there. So is that, a Cirrus SR-22 GT? Is that a Beech Bonanza A30 or G36? Could it be a big twin? All these are, obviously very attractive aircraft, and they're something that a lot of people, want to get, love to get their hands on and have ownership in. But what is a reality today? Any new aircraft is, at a minimum $600,000 to $700,000 or more. I mean, if you're looking at the Cirrus SR-22, you're talking $1 million, and then upwards to $1.3 million when you start adding on options. The other option is the used market. In the used market, you can obviously find a lot of airplanes, but then you're going to be struggling with finding balance between a good airframe, good engine, and then the proper avionics. And finding the trifecta of those three can be difficult, to say the least. And I would recommend for anyone who's thinking about purchasing an airplane is first thing is to consider what's your mission. I'll give you my example. So it's a 1978 Piper Tomahawk. It's a two-seat trainer that was developed by Piper based on a lot of surveys from flight instructors in trying to build an airplane that was easy to learn in, but still had all the fundamentals of what they wanted to teach, to include the ability to spin. So for me, this kind of fit into the mold of what I was looking for my first airplane ownership for a couple reasons. Number one, it was relatively inexpensive as far as airplanes go, but with that being said, there's a couple considerations. The engine was approaching TBO time, so that meant it was going to need to be refurbished, and that could be a costly, depending on the engine type, that could be upwards of $60,000, $70,000 or more. And then it had old avionics. So those were two things I knew that I was going to invest in the airplane. But, for my mission, I would say, unless I'm traveling with my family, the majority of my flying is by myself. And what I'm going to do is one of two things. I'm just either going to fly to a nearby airport, maybe do like a $100 hamburger flight, or I will practice instrument flying. So just practicing approaches, and can do that either in light IFR or even clear weather, just to practice those skills. When I looked at the cost of acquiring the airplane, the maintenance and upgrades I wanted to put into it, and then how I was going to be utilizing it, and then the operating costs, this one fit into what I was looking to do to, one, get my first airplane, and two, get experience on what it takes to own an aircraft. So this aircraft actually fit the bill nicely because it was low entry point cost of entry. The upgrades I want to do were reasonable, and the operating costs were low. For the most part, I'm flying by myself, and it's just meant to be the fun, my fun aircraft to fly. The advantage of still being in the club is I have three airplanes that really can follow through on the other side of that, which is providing me an airplane to do some travel in. And so whenever we travel as a family, or if I'm even traveling for a business trip, I will use one of those airplanes most of the time. So when it comes to ownership, I think it's very important to understand what your mission is going to be with that airplane, because I think that what I see too often is people buy an airplane bigger than what serves their mission. and they may be very happy with it, but understand that it's going to come with a higher cost. And for some people, that's fine. I think just make sure you buy the airplane that you're going to use for 90% of the mission that you're trying to do, and then find either a way to rent or use a club for the other. Now, when it comes to aircraft ownership, unlike the club, all those things that come with operating and owning an airplane, fall on me as the owner. So let's start with the easy one first, is where you're going to store your airplane. So hangars can be difficult to find. For me, I spent 9 months on a tie-down and on a hangar waitlist at several airports before a hangar became available. The second part of that is insurance, and largely that's going to be based on your flying experience that the insurance companies use to be risk factor, and then obviously the cost of the airplane. And then the last one is maintenance, and that's going to be the biggest variable. So now, as I talked about ownership, there's probably another area in between there that is kind of is maybe a way to offset the costs of direct ownership, and that could be a partnership. So in that case, it could be you and a small number of other owners will split the cost of an airplane. So kind of taking a similar approach to the club in the sense that not all that burden of the fixed costs or maintenance costs are on one person. You can split it, and I've seen partnerships with as little as 2 members and as many as 5 or 6. And then different ways they operate is as a group, they basically form an LLC, which is managing the airplane, and then they decide on a priority on how members in that partnership have priority of the airplane. What I've seen in some places is they alternate weeks, and then if it's your week, you have the priority of the airplane, but other members can swap with you. So it's just, kind of that. I think the challenge with a partnership is I think you just really need to be smart about who you're getting into the partnership with, because it is a big business transaction, and you want to make sure that the partners are people that you see eye to eye with. But anyways, that's a real quick view into ownership. If there's any questions, I can certainly expand on more of these coming up. And then I think probably my next 1 or 2 videos will either be just some more flying. I haven't done direct flying videos in a while. And then I can also do maybe start giving you tours of all the airplanes. So both my Piper Tomahawk, and I can show you all the upgrades I've done to the avionics. And then I can also take you through the club airplanes each time I fly those next. So anyway, I appreciate you taking the time to listen and watch, and answer any questions you have. Please give me a thumbs up and subscribe, and I will talk to you again in the near future. Thank you. Tomahawk's turning final, runway 5, Doylestown.
Doylestown traffic, 4234 Quebec, clear 5, Doylestown. Doylestown traffic, Skyhawk 30 Papa, turning final, runway 5, Doylestown.